Well, thank you so much for having me back, and happy first day of spring. I thought surely someone would write that in a joy today. I'm certainly glad to have it here. You know, these days, world events cascade upon us down the mountainside of our lives. They seem to roll like avalanches without ceasing. Before we wrap our minds and hearts around one incident, another nightmare stirs our fitful sleep. The shootings, burnings, and riots of Black Lives Matter. And before we can even respond, another tragedy rises from the ashes. The U.S. accidentally bombs an Afghan hospital where Doctors Without Borders try to heal the victims of an endless war, the longest war in U.S. history. To the south, we barricade the border against immigrants from Mexico, while Europe is awash in refugees from fires of terrorism that we cannot seem to quench. Violence in Burundi, Africa, has escalated, with government forces killing civilians and leveling charges against the leader of the Burundi Unitarians. The International Council of Unitarians and Universalists, ICUU, is working closely with the Unitarian Church of Burundi to support them in their struggles, as many of those members have been forced to join the flood of refugees. It seems as though I could stand up every Sunday with another sermon on another crisis and another call to action. Unitarian Universalists possess a long, proud history of social activism. We could talk about the Unitarian Universalist Service Committee, trace its roots all the way back to World War II, assisting victims of the Holocaust. We could discuss their present projects all around the world: sustainable recovery in Haiti, the Human Right to Water campaign, the campaign for compassionate consumption of the Earth's limited resources, the European refugee migration. It's a wonderful faith tradition that we have to embrace. But history is nothing if it does not change the way we live. Fred Rogers said, "When I was a boy and I would see scary things in the news, my mother would say to me, 'Look for the helpers. You will always find people who are helping.'" Mr. Rogers said, "To this day, especially in times of disaster, I remember my mother's words, and I am always comforted by remembering that there are still so many helpers, so many caring people in the world." The ultimate goal for us as Unitarian Universalists is to become involved, to become those helpers. The Unitarian Universalist Service Committee and the UUA announced the launch of a refugee crisis fund on September 11 last year. I find that a very propitious date, with the goal of raising $250,000. By October, 1 month later, more than $200,000 had been collected, and the UUSC increased the goal to $350,000. In an article from our online UU World magazine, Christopher Walton said, "The Service Committee will distribute the funds to partner organizations in countries that are receiving refugees from Syria and other war-ravaged nations." In a joint statement announcing the fund last October, the president of the Service Committee, William F. Schultz, and the president of the UUA, Peter Morales, said, quote, Right now, 11 million Syrians have been forced to leave their homes after more than 4 years of civil war. Worldwide, an estimated 60 million people have been displaced, leading to the largest crisis of forced displacement since World War II. Their appeal for donations also included a link to a petition calling on the U.S. government to raise the number of Syrian refugees it accepts to 200,000. So far, as of the fiscal year just ended last September, the United States had taken in how many? Anybody have a guess? 1,500. According to White House Press Secretary Josh Earnest, a commitment from President Obama is to increase that number to 10,000 for the upcoming year, this year. That means that is all the number of refugees that the United States will take in. Meanwhile, a record 800,000 asylum seekers and refugees are expected to arrive in Germany this year, 4 times as many as last year. While Hungary takes an anti-immigrant stance across its borders, building fences and detainee camps, much as some would have us do for Mexico. Did you know we had Unitarian churches there in Hungary? The Hungarian Unitarian Church issued its own appeal for funds through the International Council of Unitarians and Universalists to support relief services for migrant families in Hungary. Its funds will go to something called Hungarian Interchurch Aid, an ecumenical organization the Unitarians helped found in 1991. A portion of the funds collected here in the United States will go to support that. We truly are, as a movement, organizing and working all around the globe to promote a more just world. Even here. In Florida, for example, Vero Beach minister Scott Alexander has initiated conversations with his own congregation and local community on how to support the call from our association for increased involvement, asking the question of how we can locally prepare to harbor and serve those refugees who need us, asking the Good Samaritan question: who is my neighbor? How can I help? As you use, we affirm and promote the goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all. Catholic theologian Pierre Teilhard de Chardin wrote, "The age of nations is past. The task before us now, if we would not perish, is to build the earth." World community. Build the earth. These are heady tasks. Suppose we could come to some kind of consensus on what an ideal world might look like. No starvation, access to food and safe drinking water, adequate health care, medicine, and education, economic stability with no more slave labor, self-rule, democracy, security, and safety from oppression. Add your own description to the list. The biggest obstacle remains. How do we get there? There's an antique joke, I'm sure so many of you heard, about the city dweller who was lost in a maze of country roads, soliciting a local for directions. The helpful farmer stammers out a few attempts. Turn left where the giant oak tree used to be. No, go straight and watch for the dried up mill pond. No. Finally, in consternation, the old man concedes, come to think of it, you can't get there from here. This comic nightmare seems to represent political realities of our day. Something's wrong and we are all somehow complicit in this mess and all wrapped up in knowing everything has gone awry, but feeling helpless. We can't get there from here. The numbers are staggering. The problems overwhelming. It's in a time like this, I think about that message from Pope Francis, who basically said, forget about the numbers. These are human beings. Remember the story in all of that news coverage last fall. Nothing moved the world toward compassion for the plight of all those refugees so much as seeing the image of one young boy washed up on a Turkish beach. Turns out he had a name. 3-year-old Aylan Kurdi. He had a family. He had a destination and relatives and hopes and dreams. And we find that it's always easier somehow to register our grief over the young and the innocent and the helpless. He became the most powerful symbol of that conflict. And he became a clue for me in how we find a way to help with all these problems. So this is how we do it. We do it by helping the one. When the problems overwhelm us and we think that we are helpless to contribute, remember that no one can do everything, but everyone can do something. Mr. Rogers said, I believe that appreciation is a holy thing. That when we look for what's best in a person we happen to be with at the moment, we're doing what God does all the time. So in loving and appreciating our neighbor, we're participating in something sacred. With this in mind, I want to close by telling you a story adapted from minister, humorist, and singer-songwriter Meg Barnhouse. Sulma Franco and her partner owned a food truck in Austin, Texas. She had come from Guatemala, where she had been organizing LGBT groups at a university. After being attacked and threatened for her work, Sulma escaped by riding north on top of a train called the Beast, tying her belt to the roof rail so she would not fall off. She had been meeting with immigration officials in America while her plea for asylum was processed. But her lawyer messed up the paperwork and she ended up in detention for 7 months. Her partner had managed finally to raise the $15,000 for her bond. But it seemed unlikely that her paperwork would be ready in time. Her deportation date was in 10 days. The call for sanctuary for Sulma Franco came to First Unitarian Universalist Church of Austin, where Meg Barnhouse is senior minister. Their minister of religious education had been doing anti-racism work, as so many of our churches have done, and word got out to the immigrant community. The call went out to their church in a rush. Could you help? Reverend Meg told the board of directors she felt rushed by the request. She didn't like doing things without knowing what she was doing and felt she didn't really have enough information. None of them liked that. It was scary. What would the legal ramifications be? Couldn't she just stay in someone's home? The answer, of course, was no. Offering sanctuary is an ancient tradition dating back centuries, where soldiers would not come into a holy place and drag someone out. A church was the only place that would do. If Sulma missed her deportation date, she and her partner would lose their $15,000. And if she went back to Guatemala, there was no way she would be allowed to pick up her case for asylum where it had left off. As the discussion continued with the church board, a man at the end of the table suddenly said, "I think we should do it." A thoughtful and lively conversation ensued. A man at the other end of the table said, "This fits perfectly with our mission that we say together every Sunday. If we don't do this, what do we do?" Reverend Meg told the board that they had preached to her, that her mind had been changed. Her eyes filled with tears. In the 10 days that followed, a man came to install a shower. They sent out an email call for furniture. The minister of a nearby Presbyterian church called to say his congregation wanted to partner with them. The Sunday after Sulma moved in, Reverend Meg talked to the congregation about offering help to this one refugee. She told them about the board meeting. She told them about the Presbyterians who were willing to stand with them, and that their minister was preaching about them that very morning, telling his folks that the UUs had seized the prophetic moment. When she introduced Sulma to the congregation after the sermon, everyone rose and applauded. She spoke in Spanish about her gratitude and about wanting to be a contributing member of the community. The summer passed with lots of meetings and strategizing, emailing, phone calling, and fundraising. Immigration officials promising she would not be arrested at their office requested an August meeting. About 50 church members accompanied her. They were going to make sure there was no arrest. The ministers locked arms with her as the others stood in the hot sun singing. The TV cameras were out in force. Sulma was granted a stay of removal. The agent said, "People all the way to Washington know about this case." They celebrated with Tex-Mex food and mariachi music. Reflecting on the experience, Reverend Barnhouse said, "We hope that 1,000 churches of all denominations will become sanctuary churches, that 1,000 lawyers will work on the cases, and that the immigration system will feel the pressure of 1,000 sturdy sanctuaries surrounded by people of goodwill who resist the system in order to bring transformation and greater justice." Mr. Rogers said, "Part of the problem with the word disabilities is that it immediately suggests an inability to see or hear or walk or do other things that many of us take for granted. But what of people who cannot feel or talk about their feelings or manage their feelings in constructive ways? What of people who aren't able to form close and strong relationships? and people who cannot find fulfillment in their lives, or those who have lost hope, who live in disappointment and bitterness and find in life no joy, no love. These, it seems to me, are the real disabilities.